definitive first, second, third, what have you. You look at their decor in the National Hockey League. I do think that Utah and Detroit probably have the best assets that they wanted to send over to New Jersey in some sort, and it's blown up the way it has. It makes things a lot more difficult moving forward into the future of New Jersey's potential window here. Heck, a lot of Devils fans.
But right now, great. I just don't know. Get a single matchup. Mix it up. Guys, push the strategy. I get that shit out of the post pass. You got some more pitches. Patient. Again, put it back. Here's the ball. The days are completely out of hand at the moment. They are in 8 out of 17-4 this month. They also took back-to-back series at Boston and at New York. Remember when they traded Jeremy Gianni and Philly back in June? You thought they just given up? Actually, not so much. You there? Fire on the phone. Think it was done? Yeah, his season's done. He's lost faith. I think he's going to dump him. Cool. Mark, Billy, let's be honest. The premier setup man is going to get you any closer to the playoffs. Take it from the Rico. He's a luxury stand forward, man. Understand? Just have to bring that contract. And we got to by at least one, you mean one. Who is it? I better not say. Like that. What are you going to get to? Let's look at there first. Okay. He's 75. So they take a saving on. You get the drive, they shouldn't have done one solo, that's Maybe take care, Stanley. What do you think it's better from? I know you have almost nothing. You're going to have to sound amazing. All the ones, a couple of bucks in Sweden. Throw in, say, Anderson. Anderson. I like Anderson. No, you don't. Nobody likes. I don't know what I'm doing. Let's just do it. Okay, if that broken my Anderson, you don't even know his name. I'm thinking about it. Think about it, call me back. Get your pyro on. Mark, you can't afford it, Billy. You sure about that? I get the impression Mark's from Rincon is softening. Huh? I could be wrong, but I told whoever's interested and see if they're still interested. Call me back. That's the next event, though. Who just offered him to the Giants? Steve Phillips. Steve Bond, Ken, Manny Snow, Ken 6 Corinthian Lewis. Oh, you see the crew on Rincon. So, Billy, I hear you looking for a left-handed reliever. I get the fast one. I get the quick and easy. No, hang it. Hang on a second. Bennett, maybe? Oh, 26? I think it's double A. No, Polish, no. That was us, doing this Houston. Let me get right with you. Here's the deal. I'm getting ready to come home. It's a done deal. That was done from Benadryl, and I totally have it my case. But I've got to deal with you because you can give me everything at $225,000 in cash and the Giants can't. I'll think about it. Think about it. But whoever calls me back first gets benefits. Stop on that. Yeah. Okay, let's talk now. I'll call you back. Thanks. Just stay on the phone. Father Phillips. Why don't we call Phillips back? Phillips got to call us back. Got to tell him on his own. Hi, Mr. Schott. It's Peter Graham. I apologize. You know, I told you to really ask me to call you back because I'm going to Billy says it's $225,000 for cargo with them. Please. Yes, I added the please. Okay. Hold on one second, please. Okay, so Billy says he'll pay for it on himself. But when he sells it for more money next year, he's keeping the profit. Okay, thank you very much. We'll call you back. Thank you. Come on! Come on! You guys bought the parliament. Never mind, I got one here. Mark? Yeah? Listen, I don't want him to pitching against you tonight. Tell him to change his clothes and send him over. I got you the money. Yeah? Great. I don't want to say anything to do at all. But since you picked up that cone, you gotta send someone down.
Nerds Gummy Clusters. Unleash your senses. When it comes to resolutions, sometimes starting small can be the perfect fit. From rearranging your space so things have a place, to finding smart ways to tuck things away. Little changes are a big start. Start fresh. Relax.
Steven, my guy, buddy, pal, what's going on? We're going to be working all the incantations today. Are you excited? There's only 101 spells. Okay, yes, we are going to be writing all the incantations. Now, this is just going to be for PvE. We're not going to incorporate PvP at all. It is going to list, make it more confusing. Now, the criteria for this is going to be based on how useful the spells are, which is what I do for all of my trading videos. So there'll be some stuff that is actually pretty decent, that is just lower on the list because there's something else that is directly outclassed it. Now, I'm really trouble, there's going to be a bunch of people that just get mad about my opinions and tell me that I'm not qualified to make this list. But I'll just have you guys know that I've actually played through the game, and I've played through every single spell type in the entire game, and I did the playthrough from start to finish. You can actually check all these runs out on my VOD channel if you are interested about that. Anyway, this video is going to be a long one, so we might as well just get started. Starting off right at the bottom, where it belongs to the long causality in the F tier. Now, let's explain how the F tier actually does work. It's basically spells that I would just never want to use under any circumstance. I don't care if they actually have a very specific use, they're probably just that bad to the point that I would just never want to use them. And the long causality definitely does fit this description because it's actually the benefit of this spell. You have to take damage. You have to take 5 hits in quick succession. If you wait like a few extra seconds, you have to go take this 5 hits all over again. And your reward for getting hit 5 times in quick succession is a wholly based AoE shockwave that does send enemies flying. So it can be good if you're like trapped in a corner surrounded by a bunch of enemies and it can just push them backwards. But the damage is just so ridiculously bad that it's just never worth using. And obviously this is the exact same spell that Gideon uses, but when he uses it, it actually does do something. It does some meaningful. You can only grab other players and NPCs, but if you actually want a grab attack to work against NPCs, I'll just rather go with the Lifesteal Fist after all. It just works way better. It's a quicker animation, can do way more damage, consumes less FP, and it actually does give you health regen. And probably the best thing about Lifesteal Fist, you actually can use that against other smaller types of enemies. Inescapable Frenzy cannot work against any enemies except for NPCs. Number 99, Elven Stars. Now, this spell for 40 FP shoots out a holy projectile that does, like, no damage. That really sucks that bad. It does terrible damage. and somehow it requires 50 faith and 2 whole slots to use. What the hell? After doing like the longest animation of all time, you'd think you'd have like the most overpowered attack at your hand. But no, it sucks. They didn't hate holy damage for real. I don't understand why they hate it so much. Number 98, you have Bike's Dragon Bolt. Now this is a weapon buff and a body buff 2-in-1. The weapon buff version works the exact same way as electrified helmets, but it just works because it does the exact same damage, but it consumes more HP and has higher requirements. But the body buff version does increase your equipment loads by 15%, which is like the most useless buff of all time and a complete waste of a body buff. But they felt that buff was so overpowered that they felt the need to actually have something to counteract it by making you take more lightning damage. What the fuck? Number 97, Order's Healing. Now this spell alleviates death blood buildup. Yeah, that's what it does. It doesn't actually give you increased resistances. No, it just alleviates it. So just make sure that it doesn't reach the max of the bar, which is just stupid. Like, there's like 3 enemies in the game that actually do death blood, and then to counteract it, you have to do this stupid animation where you stand still to make sure that this doesn't reach max. And it requires intelligence. Why? Number 96, Litany of Copper Death. I'm so glad we have a whole dedicated spell just to killing skeletons, because obviously they're the most overpowered enemies in the entire game. Obviously not. Now, yes, I know you can kill death birds pretty quickly with this thing as well, but there's like 1,000 of other things that can do it just better. So basically, this thing is just a glorified skeleton killer, because against every other enemy, it just does such bullshit damage to where it's just not worth using. Even if it did like 10 times as much damage, it still wouldn't be worth using, because one, it's holy damage, and it has an intelligence requirement, which intelligence requirements for incantation wouldn't be so bad if there were actually some like weapon options and some infusions for greater intelligence, but there's not. 95, Surge of Flame. This is the best spell if you actually want to waste FP, because it does it extremely well. For some reason, it says that it actually only consumes 1 FP for every single tick of damage, but it's more like 6 FP for every single tick of damage. So it's right up lying to us. And the damage itself is just downright horrendous. It just moves through your entire FP bar and gives you like 0 reward for it. I don't understand how something with such little range can do such poor damage. But yet, here we are with Surge of Flame.
There's a proven way to enhance athletic performance. 5 to 10%.
Number 94, Bestial Constitution. This bad boy spell alleviates blood loss and frost buildup. Why doesn't it give you bonus resistances? Why is it just the buildup that you can actually get rid of? It makes no sense. In this game, you can get frostbitten and blood just as fast as you actually use this stupid spell and wait for its animation to finish. Number 93, we have the Fire's Deadly Sin. Now, this spell had a pretty fucking glitch going on way back when, to where it just made status effect build up extremely fast. But outside of that glitch, it was just kind of just shit. But since that glitch has been patched, this spell is just going to be really bad now, because basically how it works is that it's a body buff, so that means you can't use things like flame, damage strength, or your damage negation spells when you're using this one. And how it works is that it encompasses your player with this fire aura, and you take damage over time, but enemies around you also take some little bit of damage over time. But the thing is, enemies typically have more health than us, and we're not always going to be surrounded by enemies. So in most cases, it's just going to be a flat debuff to our character. And the thing that people actually use it the most for is to try and reset some frost, which the frost resetting build is like the worst concept. I don't know if you thought of that, but it's a stupid idea for a build, because frost not only does it actually do that 10% flat damage, but while the frost is active, enemies take 20% more damage for 20 seconds. Why would you want to remove the best part of that frost? It makes no sense. And especially in this game where popping status effects the next time, third, fourth time, is just way harder than the first time. Why would you want to do that to yourself? I don't understand. Just let the debuff wear out here in the last 20 seconds, you just do a bunch of damage in the meantime, and then you can just pop frost again. If you want that type of like flat percentile damage build, just go with a leaf build. It just works twice as good. Number 92, Roll of Regression. Now this spell is going to be mainly for PvP, because it actually does remove all kinds of status effects that your character has. It does remove all the buffs that your enemy actually did use, and also does dispel and nullify spells mid-flight as well. Now the reason why it's not going to be that good in PvE is because not only does it remove any buffs, but it also removes all of your buffs as well that you did use. And in terms of like nullifying and making spells disappear mid-flight, that doesn't really work that way in PvE. There's like 2 spells in the entirety of the game that probably can be nullified mid-flight. And in terms of the status effect healing that it actually does get, the only status effects that you really want to kill yourself with in PvE is Skull and Poison. And there's a whole dedicated squad that can really do that for much cheaper, because this thing consumes 55 FP. And to have a 37 intelligence requirements. 37 intelligence, oh my god. 91 Death Blasting. Oh my god, I've never seen such an egregious offense of a cool-looking spell that performs target itself. I would still never want to use it because Ancient Dragon's Lightning Strike exists, which that one is just way better because it can go way further. There's no RNG aspect to it. It only takes up one spell slot compared to the Death Lightning 2. It has less refinements. Now, it does give him a little bit more FP, but it's well worth it because it does way more damage than Death Lightning ever could. Now, Death Lightning does actually leave a Death Blight mist on the ground, but Death doesn't even work in PvE, so who cares? Now, getting into the D tier, number 19, we have Urgent Heal. Now, the D tier is going to consist of a bunch of spells that just kind of suck, but they probably have like one very specific use. And for Urgent Heal, I don't really know why it's called Urgent Heal because it's not that urgent. It has just as long as an animation as every other healing spell, but the healing effect is just much worse. Now, the only thing that actually does do is that you can walk while using the spell itself, but being that the animation isn't really any quicker, I don't really recommend using it, except for like right at the beginning when you end up getting it, until you end up finding the regular heal invitation, and you can just switch to that one instead. Number 89, Dragon Bolt Blessing. Now this is a spell that is a body blow that does actually improve your resistances to all status effects. It doesn't by that much, but the fact that it does improve it by a little bit is still going to be nice. It also does make enemy attacks deflect off you, but it's only like a certain type of enemy attacks from like small touch of enemies. So you notice like 99% of the things in the game will just not deflect off. So it's not really that beneficial. But for whatever reason, they still felt the need to just give it a negative side effect, and that this one just makes you take more lightning damage. I don't know why. Number 88, Swarm of Flies. Now this is a spell that is just going to be nerfed way too hard, to the point where Blood Boon is just going to be the better option now. But yeah, this thing is a tracking projectile with upon impact does terrible damage, but it actually does do a little bit of blood loss buildup, with emphasis on a little bit, because you're barely going to properly with any type of anything with this thing. It's just that bad. Especially against enemies that like to move around a whole bunch, because they're going to take like 2 steps to the left or the right, they're just going to move out of range of that little AoE. Now the only reason that I actually possibly want to use this spell is if you're using it in tandem with a bleed-based weapon, so you actually want to keep that blood loss build-up active while you just finish them off with your weapon itself, then I guess that could be a decent option, but there's other spells that is still better. 87, Lord's Aid, another spell that heals you from side effects. This one alleviates poison, blood loss, and sleep buildup, which I'm not going to talk about again, how like blood loss, sleep, and frost alleviation is just useless. But for poison, curing poison is nice, but there's like 1,000 spells that already do this. But one thing that actually this does, but the other ones do not do, is that it's very cheap, and it actually works in an AoE, so actually can help and heal your allies as well. So this spell's only use is to cure poison of yourself and allies, and that is it. 86, Immutable Shield. Now this spell actually does add a buff to your shield that makes it when you block, you don't take any elemental damage or any status effect buildup, which actually does sound pretty good. But unfortunately, it lasts 30 seconds. You do a stupidly long animation just to cast it. It's going to make it pretty hard and annoying to actually use it in the middle of a boss fight. And it has a 19 intelligence and faith requirement, so it's only going to be useful for that one specific faith and intelligence build, which is only one weapon in the entire game, and no one's using the faith and intelligence. So a spell that actually could be pretty decent has just been made very niche due to the fact that it doesn't last very long and has bad requirements. Number 85, Aspects of the Crucible Breath. Now this spell is very similar to Surge and Flame in the fact that it is like a shorter to mid-range type of fire spell that you actually do constant damage when you hold on to the trigger itself. But the reason it's going to be the slightly bit more upgraded version is that it actually does do more damage in a wider AoE and actually can stagger some smaller enemies as well. But the reason why I'm still going to put it low on the list is because it consumes way too much FP still. For how much damage it does do, it should not be consuming this much FP. It is not viable. If it is cut the FP cost in half, I would like it a lot more because it would be a pretty decent AoE type of spell and good for crowd control. And one other thing that I don't really like about this spell is that you're always forced to walk forward. You can't like walk backwards or sideways and stay in the same spot. You're always forced to walk forward, which is very annoying. 84, Bestial Sling. And now this is a spell that is also going to nerf pretty hard. Now the uses of this spell before the actual nerf is that it did really nice poison damage, and it actually worked at a pretty safe distance despite it actually being a shorter range projectile. But the nerfs actually did bring upon the fact that it just does bad poison damage now, and it gets damage roll. So the damage is only going to be good at like point blank range, which actually is some pretty decent damage. But there's another spell out there that just works way better at point blank range that you're just much better off using. So there's not much of a point to Bestial Sling anymore. 83, Cure Poison. Yet again, another spell that heals you from poison. I don't know why you needed so many. But yes, this one just does it way the best because it's the cheapest one and actually has the quickest animation, and it only gets a 10 faith requirement. So you don't really need a faith type build to benefit of using the spell. But like, it's still not going to be that useful because like almost every single poison song you can just like ride your horse to it. and poison doesn't really do much damage anyway. 82 Assassin's Approach. Now this spell is kind of like the spook spells from the previous Souls games in that actually silences footsteps and reduces fall damage, which both of these things are like borderline useless in this game because the fall damage, the margin of error between actually not taking any damage and dying is like so incredibly small, so where reducing fall damage doesn't really make much of a difference. And if you actually want to silence your footsteps, you can just crouch walk. Crouch walking just does the exact same thing. So you're better off using any other spell or one skill that actually makes you like invisible, so you can actually still walk in front of enemies so that they won't see you, which is pretty much more beneficial. 81, we have Order's Blade. Now this is a weapon buff of which adds holy damage to your weapon, which holy damage, yes, it can be very viable, but it still is definitely the worst damage type in the entire game, and it's not even close. Now this bad boy in particular actually does give you an intelligence requirement, which the funny thing is about incantation weapon buffs, they only scale off faith. So those points you have into intelligence are just going to be wasted stats for the most part. So if you actually need a faith-based weapon buff to just do some nice damage, Electrify Parliament is just going to be the better play every single time because it gets the better damage type and has much better requirements. The only time you would ever want to use Order's Blade is if you're having problems killing some death right birds and you can actually use a buff. But even then there's actually like better things out there to actually kill death birds. Or if you wanted to buff the Grace Club or the Tree Spear, being that those others actually can be buffed and actually already have holy damage, you might as well go use Order's Blade instead of using another type of damage buff. So you're only doing 3 different types of damage. But outside of those uses, I would just never want to touch it ever. But outside of those uses, I would just never touch this thing. Number 80, we have a Durance Beast Claw. Now this is a bestial incantation that does a pretty cool AoE attack. Actually does do some slashing damage as well, which is pretty unique because most spells that do physical damage will tend to just do regular standard. For slashing damage, I just much prefer. Now the reason it's going to get lower on the list is for a couple of different things. One, Beast Claw exists, and that spell I just much rather have because it's like half the cost in terms of FP. It's a much quicker animation, and it can probably do more damage because you can't fully charge it as well. Whereas Grand Beast Claw, yes, it does go in a 360-degree radius, so you actually can hit enemies that are surrounding you, which is like still a very neat situation to be in. You don't really get in that situation often. But probably the worst part about the Durance Beast Claw is going to be the fact that it consumes so much stamina. I don't know why it has such a high stamina cost, versus that 2-part animation. It still is a very long animation, but the stamina cost is just way too high. 79, we have Flame Sling. Now this is going to be like the basic incantation projectile that you actually have like right at the beginning of the game. It doesn't do the damage, it's a slow projectile. You can't fully charge it, and it can serve you perfectly fine at the early of the game, but as soon as you end up getting things like Lightning Spear or Black Flame, you still can get pretty early on. You're the best off switch for those, so yeah, it's only going to be good right at the beginning. Now getting into the C tier at number 78, we have Shadow Fates. Now the C tier itself is going to comprise of not necessarily bad spells, but spells that just have very niche uses. And for Shadow Fates, this spell works very similar to how the Alluring spells worked in the previous game and how the Light Shadow Action Lore does work, and then it shoots out this double projectile where enemies must aggro onto that projectile itself. Now White Shadow's Lore is going to be the better version, because that projectile ends up lasting a little bit longer, but you do get Shadow Burn earlier in the playthrough. But the playstyle of this spell itself is just going to be very niche because you only really use it if you're like surrounded by a bunch of enemies and you just want them to just go away and not aggro you for like half seconds. But you're trying to like stealthily away and sneak through a corridor while somebody's blocking it and you don't really want to fight that enemy because you're low on flasks, then maybe in that situation as well, it's probably mainly going to be used like with low hit runners. Anyone on the casual playthrough, I just recommend just sprinting and just spamming roll, and you're probably going to be fine 90% of the time. Number 77, Poison Armament. Now this is a buff that adds poison to your weapon itself. Doesn't add any additional damage, just the poison. With the poison stat spec, it's actually pretty weak in this game. It doesn't really take that much damage. Even the total percentile damage is not great. It's like a total of 6%, which 6% is still nice. So if you actually do the proper poison like right at the beginning of the fight and switch to your main weapons, it can serve as like a nice type of damage, especially comparing it alongside the Kindred of Rock Exaltation or the Mushroom Crown. But if you actually wanted to proc poison right at the beginning of the fight really quickly, and then the poison mist afterward and spell could just do it way faster and way quicker, and then you could use it like an actual damaging based weapon buff on your main weapon, and then Mushroom Crown again. But for me personally, I would just let the poison run its course, use an actual weapon damaging buff, and for use a higher damaging weapon skill, and for just end up resulting in way more damage than the poison mothlight type of gameplay would use. But using both poison mothlight and poison armament actually does make for a pretty fun playstyle. 76, Heal. The healing spell, the one that heals you. Now this one is going to be like the most basic one, and I recommend as soon as you actually find a great skill, you should just switch to that one. Unless you don't have much FP, if you have like lower faith. But if you have lower faith, then you're probably better off from like a healing over time based spell because they don't actually scale with anything. So yeah, it's up to you. 75 protection of the Earth Tree. Now this is a body buff of which adds 30% more damage negation to all your elemental damage types, which actually does sound pretty good, but for the same amount of FP and the same amount of requirements, you can actually go with other types of body buffs that just boost your elemental damage negation by 60%, but it's only for one particular damage type, which they're just going to be better in general because for the most part, almost every single boss only does one type of elemental damage. So if you just know what type of damage the boss is actually doing, you can just pick that one in particular, it will end up benefiting way more. But there are very specific circumstances and some bosses that do two different types of elements, to which probably using this spell is going to be the best bet, but once again, that is very niche. 74, Rejection. This is a spell that rejects things. It repels them. It just knocks enemies to the ground. Yes. It's mainly going to be for like PvP because like ledge killing is funny there. I mean, PvE, you still can do the exact same thing. You're probably going to find more use in like hitting enemies where like they're surrounding you, or like where someone's blocking a doorway, just like knocking them to the ground, or sometimes it's knocking an enemy to the ground to like get a fully charged heavy type of. It could be nice as well. So yeah, there's like some specific uses. Me personally, I just like never use it though. 73, Herm's Bolt. Now this is a very quick lightning based projectile that can actually go pretty far. Doesn't really consume much FP as well. Can use them like nice DPS. So you might be wondering, why would we put this one lower on the list and you think it's actually so good? That's for a couple of reasons. One, it doesn't really stagger that well compared to some other types of projectiles. So enemies are not getting staggered and it's like far much from you. You don't really have much of a chance to actually output a lot of damage. And probably the main reason is because Lightning Strike exists, and I just much rather have that one for PvP at least, because yes, Strike Bolt is very quick and it makes it good at like well-touched enemies in PvP, but Lightning Strike is going to be way better because it does more damage, actually hits in a nice AoE, so it's going to hit multiple enemies at once, and especially against large bosses, it can just output a very solid amount of damage. But due to the versatility of that spell as well, and being that it kind of does the exact same thing as Strike Bolt, but it's a little bit better, I just much rather have that one equipped almost every single time over Herm's. Number 72, we have Darkness. Now this spell summons this big black ball of which when enemies walk inside of it, they'll just end up getting de-aggroed, which is very good because when enemies lose aggro, they end up taking more damage. So you can just use it as a way to just do more damage on your next hit. It's very good with stealth or assassin-based combat because you can end up getting the backstab, and your backstab will just end up getting way more damage. Another use that actually does have as well is that when you're surrounded by a bunch of enemies and you want to teleport out, you can just use it, all the enemies will de-aggro, then you can just open up your map and just freely teleport away. Now this exact same spell is automatically outclassed by the quit out function. You can just quit out and then enemies will just automatically de-aggro that way as well. That doesn't consume 24 FP, so number 71, Wrath of Gold. Now this is a very high damaging short range AoE attack that actually does do some pure holy damage. Now yes, once again, holy damage, the worst damage type, a lot of enemies and bosses are very resistant to it, but it can still be viable. But I would still never want to use this in PvE. It's definitely going to be a PvP based spell due to how quick that it is, and it consumes 40 FP. This is never going to be viable in PvP. For 40 FP, you can use things that just do way more damage than this. 40 FP is not viable whatsoever. Number 17, we have Black Flame Ritual. Now this is obviously a Black Flame invitation, which all of them perform extremely well because they get that percentile damage over time effect. I just think that Black Flame Ritual just performs the worst out of the Black Flame invocations because one, it consumes the most amount of FP at 30, it has the highest requirements at 42 faith, and I feel like it's just very inconsistent as well. Basically how the spell works is you summon this weird circle-shaped AoE attack that sits around the player itself, and basically the way to use it is to try and bait enemies inside of it to where you can just fight them alongside your weapon, because actually it's a pretty quick animation, so just using your primary weapon to fight alongside the Black Flame Ritual is definitely the best way to go about it. But the AoE itself does only hit like 3 times maximum, and it doesn't really result in that much damage. And especially against smaller enemies, it is very inconsistent with how like the AoE is actually shaped. A lot of enemies are only going to hit like once or twice max, and it doesn't really result in that much damage. It's definitely going to be a lot more consistent against like larger types of bosses. But even then, I'd rather use things like Scouring Black Flame or just regular Black Flame because those can be used at a safer distance, and those can actually end up getting better damage to FP ratio as well because they're just much cheaper. But it still is a pretty fun spell to use. Number 69, nice. We have Whirl of Flame. Now, this spell I was kind of sleeping on, probably sleeping on. I took like a little nap on it because I was definitely underestimating its range, especially when fully charged. It actually can go pretty far. And with how the spell works, it has like a little lingering effect at the end. And if enemies stay at that exact distance and get hit by every single one of those flaming particles, it actually can do some very nice damage. But there's a couple of reasons why I'm still not going to want to really use it much. That's one, it has a very long animation that you can't really cancel at all, especially when it's fully charged. You're probably going to get hit almost every single time that you use it. And two, if enemies even move like the slightest little bit to like the left or the right, they're just going to dodge it, like basically the entire projectile. You might hit like a little part of the projectile, but it'll still like dodge shit damage. And for like that exact same amount of FP, and for that long of an animation, you can just do way more damage with other types of spells as well. So it's not that bad, but it's not really that good either. Number 68, Asagusaxuga Void. Now, this bad boy is probably the coolest looking spell in the entire game. Does a lot of damage. You can like aim it 360 degrees throughout the entire room. Can do about 70 stance damage if the entire color actually ends up hitting an enemy. But unfortunately, I'm still looking for can't use it much because it has so many downsides. 1, it takes up 3 spell slots. 2, it consumes 62 FP. 3, look at how long the animation is. You're just sitting there in the air for like that long. You're about to get hit. And as soon as you do get hit, you just like drop straight to the ground. The entire animation just ends. Even if you get hit straight away, there's like no type on at all. You just explosive with 62 FP. It also is like pretty hard to aim as well. You're going to hit certain enemies in particular. It's got like spray that actually does hit them. And for some reason, it actually doesn't get boosted by the Dragon Convenience Seal. Don't really know why it doesn't really get a benefit of battle, but it does get some style points though. Number 67, Poison Mist. This is like the most perfect analogy for like prompts of balancing in general. You have this really cool dragon incantation that can summon this like big ass laser projectile that just shoots out very far. And that badass looking spell is just less useful in my opinion than this green cloth spell. Typical, honestly. But the reason as to why I find Poisonous Mist more useful is because it just procs poison very quickly. You can just use it at the start of the boss fight. Just switch back to your main weapons and incantations and just end up doing damage while the boss just takes damage every time to poison. It's just really good. And Poison Mist doesn't actually hyper enemies as well. I know there's plenty of people out there that have actually used it. I guess if you're playing Tree Sentinel to like make sure they just end up dying without just hypering at all. Now once again, poison doesn't really do much damage in general, so I wouldn't really use it that much. But free damage over time is still free damage over time. Now getting into the B tier, at number 66, we have the Triple Rings of Light. Now the B tier is going to consist of a bunch of really good spells. For the most part, a lot of them are just going to be outclassed by something else. And for Triple Rings of Light, it's actually a nice projectile spell. It can do some decent damage, has a nice wide area effect. The projectile actually does return to the player, which is actually pretty cool because you can actually pair it alongside Power Retaliation or Golden Retaliation to shoot back another projectile. And it's especially easy with this spell because you can actually just shoot the projectile straight at your toes and deflect it that way, so that's some nice utility there. Now, there are going to be a few things I wish I just don't like about the spell. One, it consumes 23 FP, whereas other spells only gave this perform way better at the exact same FP cost, so even the watch people. Two, it doesn't really stagger enemies that well. A lot of enemies is like phase straight through it, even smaller ones. And once again, it's a golden order invocation, so it's going to do holy damage. It has an intelligence requirement, which I already talked about that plenty times. I don't really going to get into it again. But the main reason why it's going to get into the B tier for me, or lower B tier, is because the Discus of Light spell exists, and that spell just does the exact same thing. But it's way better in my opinion. It just goes way further. It's actually a quicker projectile. It consumes only 3 FP, which compared to 23 FP, I don't think I've ever tell you why that's way different. And the damage difference isn't even that great as well. It's very similar damage. The only thing that actually might prefer Triple Rings of Light over Discs of Light in is for crowd control, hitting multiple enemies at once. And it's easy to use Golden Retaliation because you can just like throw the projectile off the ground. And like that is it. But Discs of Light still is way better. Number 65, Flame Cleanse Me. Yet again, another spell that heals you from poison. But this one is going to be the best one because it also does heal you from Scarlet Rot as well, which is way more dangerous because it just takes a lot more damage, and there's plenty of Scarlet Rot sources in the game to try to kill yourself from. So you should just always have this spell on every single time that you actually go into those areas. Just have it equipped and use it because it's very cheap, doesn't have much requirements as well. Number 64, Flame of the Fell God. This is a spell that I want to like, but it just does not like me back. For this spell, you only really use it at the beginning of the fight to stay engaged, and then you just like never really use it again throughout the fight because it's a very slow animation. But the projectile actually does have some nice tracking. It's slowly moving, and once again, it does get close to an enemy. It does explode, it does some nice damage. There's a cool fire trail along the ground, but there's a few things that I dislike about it. One, it has a 34 FP cost. It takes up 2 whole slots, has a 41 phase requirement, and you can only use one at a time. You can't cast multiple and have a whole bunch of cool tracking projectiles that they all explode at once to just do like massive damage. It doesn't work that way. Why doesn't it work that way? I would like it so much more. Because using it like in the middle of the fight is just not going to be that good, especially against like quicker enemies, because like they can just dodge it very easily. But it would be so nice to just use it as like some nuke bomb right at the beginning of the fight, have a bunch of them going around. Oh, what a missed opportunity. Number 63, we have Magma Breath. Now, this is going to be the first of the Dragon Communion invocations that we actually end up talking about. And all of them are just extremely good. You can put all of these ones into the S tier. But for Magma Breath, the reason why it's going to get lower on the list is because Theodoric's background exists, and that does the exact same thing but better. It takes Dragonfire could probably do it easier because it actually does hit a longer distance, but Magneroth actually does do more damage. But you'll find plenty of success with both spells. Number 62, we have the Black Flame Blades. Now this is a weapon buff, although it adds Black Flame to your weapon. With Black Flame, as I said earlier, it's extremely good. What we're going to do is hit an enemy at minimum 40 times, then it's instantly dead because it gets 2.5% damage for every single Black Flame prop, which using a weapon to prop Black Flame is probably going to be the best version of that, because you're going to wait for a whole last spell animation to come out. You're just hitting with your weapon every single time to see your light attacks. Which means you don't even have to have an upgraded weapon, just have like a +0 dagger, honestly, and just throw Black Flame Blade on there. You hit them enough times and they'll just end up dying, and it won't even take that long. So honestly, it does sound like it's very broken, but the reason why it's going to get lower on the list is because it lasts 7 seconds. The buff only lasts 7 seconds, which you can pass it quickly, especially with rolling and sprinting, but 7 seconds is barely anything. Enemy combos last longer than that. You like use it when you have an opening, and by the time you end up dodging the enemy's combo, the buff is already gone. I don't know why it doesn't at least last 15 or 20 seconds, because I'm pretty sure Jaw String buffs, I'm pretty sure they last at least 15 seconds, so I don't know why this thing that has the exact same animation basically, why doesn't it last this as long? It doesn't make any sense. Number 61, Radagon's Ring of Lights. Now this bad boy is a very solid AoE projectile that goes in like every single direction, and if enemies are within range, then it's going to get hit every single time, doesn't matter which way it actually goes. Now one thing I don't really like about it much is the range isn't that great, and the damage is pretty poor as well. But when you have it fully charged, the range is actually amazing, and the damage is really good, especially with 21 FP. Now, the obvious downside for it being fully charged is that the animation is very long, it takes a long time to charge up, but if your spacing and your timing is correct, it can end up being one of the more better projectiles to use for AoE and clearing on this crowd control in general. But the way I'm talking about it, you'd think I'd put it like higher in the A tier, but once again, it's a golden honor incantation, sometimes holy damage, which I love holy damage aesthetically, but it's just going to be the worst damage type in the entire game. There's way too many enemies and bosses that resist to it for it to be good. I'm sorry. And it has a 31 intelligence and faith requirements. Oh my god, I'm going to say it again. Faith and intelligence skills are just not going to be that good in this game at this stage, because there's only one weapon that has a faith and intelligence scaling, and there's no infusion for faith and intelligence. Maybe if the DLC actually does add an infusion for faith and intelligence, then these skills might actually get a lot more play. But at the moment, they're just going to be underutilized because there's not many builds that you can actually make around this thing. Number 60, we have Black Flame's Protection. Now, this is a body buff, of which actually increases physical damage negation by 35%, but it also does reduce your healing by 20%. That's all types of healing, from your spells to your flasks. Now, for me personally, I feel like this is getting more of like a new game plus 2, plus 3 type of spell, because I don't really notice enemies doing too much damage in regular new game. You can just go level up your vigor, and for the most part, you're perfectly fine. And even then, I just use things like Golden Vow or some damage negation talismans if I'm having any types of issues, and that is more than enough, because I'd rather have my body buff do things for like reducing my damage, like Flame Bearing Strength or Power to Fury, but it's still not being a lot more useful in this later new game playthroughs, because you're going to run the risk of just getting one-shot sometimes, and Black Flame Protection could just negate that. Number 59, the Stone of the Rain. Now this goes at a whole bunch of rocks, which is just really cool. But it is actually a pretty cheap projectile. You can cast it over and over again. It does some nice poise damage. It does do physical damage, which is pretty unique. I only did strike damage specifically. I don't know why it starts breaking on standard damage. But even with all of these things, there's the stuff that is making me not really like it over some of the other projectile spells like Flameful of Condom, Lightning Spear, or Frenzied Burst. And that's one, you have to like stand still while casting it. Two, the damages are really that great compared to some of the other spells, and that's mainly because you can't fully charge it. I wish you could like fully charge this spell and have like a bigger rock that you throw. That'd be really nice. But yeah, the projectile doesn't really go as far. It actually travels a lot slower than some of the other projectiles. And the initial casting speed is also very slow. Now you can like consecutively cast it over and over again, which is cool, but it doesn't really mean much if your stamina cost is extremely high, so you can only get like 3 or 4 casts off before you just end up running out of stamina. So for me, I would just like for this thing to get strike damage, probably consume a little bit less stamina, and have a fully charged version, please. Number 58, Bestial Vitality. Now this is a health regen spell. It gives you 5 HP per second for 120 seconds. So that totals to 600 HP, which doesn't really seem like much, but at lower levels it definitely is going to be noticeable. But the main reason as to why I did put this into the B tier is because it only has a 12 faith requirements, which for every single build I recommend people just go into a little bit of faith, maybe around like 12 to 15, because you get a bunch of really good support incantations, Bestial Vitality being one of them. The fact that you don't need to spend as much faith or actually level up the seal and its benefit of some nice health regen is always going to be really good. Number 57, we have Argakil's Flame. Now, as I mentioned before with the Dragon and Community Incantations, all of these are just amazing. They can all deserve to be to the S tier, but as the ranking is based on how useful it is, I just consider Argakil's Flame to be less useful because I like the lesser version, the cheaper based Dragon Incantations more. than like the named-based ones, the ones that are more expensive, because the named dragons consume 25% more FP but only do 17% more damage. So in terms of total overall damage, the lesser ones are just like much better in terms of doing that. And the lesser ones can actually be used on horseback where these ones cannot. And also with the named dragon ones, you're ample. So if you get hit one time, you just flush straight to the ground and you lose like a bunch of stamina as well. Now if you are like at a higher level and have a bunch of mind, then I just recommend going with the named dragon ones instead because you just end up getting better DPS. But for like regular new game, I probably just recommend going with like the lesser ones, the ones that are more cheap, because you just definitely get more total overall damage that way with how much FP that these things actually consume. I feel like the more FP efficient ones are just going to be more valuable. Now, being that we're talking about the dragon incantations, I might as well get into the Smaragd Splintstone Breath. Basically for the exact same reasons as the other one, I just prefer like the lesser versions better. But the reason I have the magic based one over the fire based one is because with like faith and arcane type of builds, you don't really have much access to magic damage. So just having something that actually can do magic damage to kill enemies that are more weak to magic is just going to be more useful in my opinion. Hence this one is being higher on the list. Number 55, Great Heal. Now healing spells is going to be dependent from build to build. With my build, as you can see in the gameplay, I have like a high amount of faith, but not much health. So like Great Heal is doing plenty fine for me, so this will end up being my option if I actually were to make a build with these stats. But if I had like more health and not much faith, then I'd probably end up going something like Lord's Heal or Earthly Heal, especially if I was using things like Spirit Summons while I was doing Cult, because healing your allies is going to be more beneficial with like the better spells, the ones that just consume more MP. So it's kind of like hard to rate these healing spells. I'm just going to put them in order of like which ones just end up just giving you more health, honestly. Number 54, the Flame of Frenzy. Now this is going to be an extremely good early game spell. It's a madness-based incantation, which they're kind of built for PvP, but they are still plenty fine and very good in PvE as well. But this one only consumes 16 FP and it has a 16 faith requirement, so just having this for early game is going to be extremely beneficial. Actually, it can still perform nicely towards the end of the game, because when fully charged, this will produce some nice damage, and actually does do 56 stance damage as every single one of these projectiles end up hitting, which is still pretty rare to happen, but it can happen. But there's a couple reasons why it's going to get lower on the list and they actually be into the B tier instead of higher up. Is because one, I'd rather have Unendurable Frenzy, which is like the more beefed up version of Flame of Frenzy, and secondly, towards the end of the playthrough, it kind of just falls off a little bit, so the other projectiles end up doing more damage and having more range, but only like a little bit more MP. But this is definitely going to be one of the better fire spells to have earlier on. Now next up, we're going to talk about all of these 60% damage negation spells. Flame Protect Me, Launch Divine Fortification, Barrier of Gold, and Lightning Fortification. Every single one of these spells give you 60% more damage negation to one particular type of element, and depending on which boss fight they actually go into, will be dependent on which one you actually end up choosing. Now these are just amazing because they're pretty low requirements, only 24 faith, and you just end up getting 60% damage negation to one particular element, which is just amazing. But that basically cuts it in like more than half, which is just insane. So if there's any types of like attacks you're having problems with and do elemental damage, just pick one of these bad boys up, and it's no longer going to be a problem, honestly. Now once again, these aren't going to get much higher because in regular new game, I don't notice things doing too much damage. As long as these spectacles are bigger, and if things still hit a bit too hard, then using things like Golem Vow or some like talismans to boost your damage negation is going to be more beneficial. But I'd just rather have my body lock be for like damage boosting things like Flame Grim Effect or Power to Bury. But in later new game plus iterations, these spells are going to be a must-have. Now getting into the A tier, at number 49, we have a Lord Skill. Now the A tier is going to consist of just a bunch of really good spells that are going to be useful in most situations, and you'll benefit greatly of using them. Now for Lord Skill, as I mentioned with Great Skill, all the healing sources is going to be dependent on what build that you actually have. If you notice that Lord Skill is giving you more than like 75% of your health back, then you're probably best off going with this one. If it's giving you like way more than that, then maybe Great Skill is going to be the better option because it's a lot cheaper. But if you're a person that's using things like summons or spirit actions, then maybe Earthly Heal is going to be the one for you. Number 48, Blood Goo. Now this spell is the reason why Swarm of Flies just gets lower on the list, because it does the exact same thing, but just better for a cheaper FP cost. Now this spell is going to be a fire-based projectile, has a nice horizontal spread, but it hitting multiple enemies at once. Actually does some nice damage, but the best part about it is that it does leave this blood flame of fall on the ground, which for enemies stand inside of it, it takes some bloodlust build-up every time. And this bloodlust build-up is just way better than Swarm of Flies bloodlust build-up, and actually does do it a larger area effect. Now yes, it is going to be just on the ground, so against enemies that are flying, it's obviously not going to be as good. But the way to use the spell is to just throw it at the ground, enemies will just walk inside of it, take a bunch of bleed, and for only like 13 FP, you can't really go wrong.
And Montana's comfort is a feeling and a flavor. Dig into our comfort classics. Victor Smokehouse Maple Bacon.
Number 47, Beast Claw. Now, this spell is going to be one of the more underrated ones in the entire game because it's incredibly cheap and actually does some nice damage. And I think this is just going to be the upgraded version of Greg's Beast Claw because for half the amount of FP, you can like fully charge this thing and actually make it do more damage than that spell and consume way less stamina. Now, yes, it does only go in like one direction, whereas Greg's Beast Claw goes in a lot of different directions. But with how easy it is to use, with how much range it does get, it also gets slashing damage as well, which is better than standard damage. And another cool thing about this spell, you actually can use it on Force Factor, if you guys didn't know. Number 46, we have the Blessings Boon. Now, this is another health regen spell, which all health regen spells are going to be good because they don't scale with any other stats. Doesn't matter what level your seal is at, it's always going to give you that flat amount every single time, which this spell gives you 8 HP per second for 90 seconds, which now there's like 3 different red lightning incantations in the game that all work the exact same way, and then you just like slam this red lightning attack onto the ground. I kind of wish that this worked a little bit differently to have more nuance with these red lightning spells, but they all still perform extremely well because they do a lot of damage. They don't really consume much FP. It is going to be like a longer animation that's only meant for close range, but you do get some nice hyper ammo, so you don't really get staggered out of it as well, and they do end up sending enemies flying. Now, despite all of these spells performing really well against a majority of bosses, the one thing that I wish that I did have was more stance damage, because for a close range hyper armor attack, I just wish that it always broke enemies quicker, especially for Ancient Dragon's lightning speed for only 22 stance damage. For this long of an animation, you're like never gonna poise break anything. But for a quick attack that's good as single target damage, this one can honestly do it just as well as other ones. But if you want something for more of an AoE to hit both enemies at once, then Lansax's Blade is probably going to be for you because this one works very similar. Actually does consume a little bit less FP, doesn't do as much damage, but actually does shoot out a wave projectile afterwards, and actually does hit multiple enemies at once, which is better for quick detection and photo. And sometimes it can actually hit the same enemy multiple times. Now this one also does have a higher requirement at 40 fade, but when you do end up getting your hands on it, it actually does perform extremely well. Now next up, I want to talk about all of the fortification spells. Now these are like the 30% damage negation spells. Now you might be wondering, you put the 60% damage negation spells lower on the list, but the 30% ones are higher. Why is that? And that is because these have a 10 faith requirement. 10 faith, that's actually insane. That means almost any type of building can be able to use these things. You just gotta spec into a little bit of faith, probably not even any faith at all, because most side classes actually do give you at least 10 faith, and you get all of these right at the beginning of the game. And if you end up fighting a boss that actually does some elemental type of damage, you can just put this on, doesn't consume much FP as well, lasts 90 seconds, and you can just end up taking a whole bunch of attacks. That is extremely good to have. I always recommend for any type of build that you're using, just go into a little bit of faith so you can actually utilize all of these side support spells. 39, Oathflame. Now this spell can perform just as well as anything in the entire game because it actually does a lot of damage in just one little kit. Now it's going to be melee range type of spell. But for only 16 FP and the fact that you can't fully charge it and still a whole bunch of damage in that short amount of time is extremely good. And for only a 16 fade requirement, you can't really go wrong. But the reason why it's going to get low on the list is because Catch Blend exists, and that one just can perform way better because it consumes way less FP, has a much faster animation. You can use things like running attacks, rolling, and jumping attacks to make them come out even faster. And the DPS of Catch Blend is just way better than Earthblend could ever be, even if you use things like a giant seal, it can still perform better. So yeah, the only reason it gets this lower list is because it's out fast, but if you still use it, you'll find plenty of success. Number 38, Lightning Strike. Now this spell is the reason why Rainbow ended up getting lower on the list. It's because I just consider this one to be better for PvE, and the fact that it just does more damage. Now yes, it doesn't really come out as fast as Burn Bolt, nor consume as less FP, but this bonus has so much utility and so much more uses compared to Burn Bolt. It's good for single target damage, it's good at trap control and hitting multiple enemies at once, and it's really good against like larger bosses, because if every single one of those lightning projectiles end up hitting, it does a lot of damage, and with how fast you can pass it and how much range that it has, for only 19 FP, it ends up being one of the best spells that you can use. Number 37, Noble Presence. I love and adore this build. It's a cool ability crafting attack that does some black flame damage over time. You can fully charge it to send enemies flying into a whole bunch of stance damage. And with how quick this thing can be casted, it's probably like the most reliable way of actually blocking that black flame damage over time effect. But one thing to keep in mind is that it does consume 20 FP, so if you're constantly spamming it over and over again, you're going to notice that your entire FP bar is going to be gone. But charging it up sparingly is probably going to be the best way to go about it, because it can actually output a whole bunch of damage, especially if you use the Gutskin Noble Robes, which further boost it by 20%, and then you get Faction and a really cool spell. Number 36, Blessing of the Earth Tree. Now this is the last of the Hellbreeder spells we're going to be talking about, and this one actually does give you 12 HP per second for 90 seconds, which is actually an enormous amount. Now, as I was mentioning before, Hellbreeder spells are good because they don't scale with anything, but they actually stack with like almost every other buff in the entire game. So just throwing it over the top of all your other healing spells, your body buffs, aura buffs, it's going to perform extremely well. Now the downside of this one is that it does actually have a higher fate requirement at 38, and does consume 60 FP, but actually does it in a very large AoE, so it actually does heal your nearby allies and your spirit actors all around you. And honestly, at higher fate levels, I would just rather have the regular healing based spells, but as I mentioned before, they all stack with each other, so you get a spell on top.
If a rainy day leaves you needing home repairs, Easy Financial is here to help. With home equity loans at our lowest rates to get you sleeping soundly again. Apply online or at over 350 locations and get approved today without impacting your credit score.
Number 35, we have Aspects of the Crucible Tail. Now this spell for 20 FP does this tail slapping attack. That doesn't really do too much damage, not have much range. But the best part about this spell is that you have it fully charged, because it actually does add a whole bunch more range and have a second swiping attack that actually does a whole bunch of damage, especially when paired with the Crucible set, which actually does further improve the damage by 15%. And the entire combo does over 50 stance damage. 50 stance damage, and it sends enemies flying as well, so it's extremely underrated to have, especially due to the fact that it actually does do physical damage, which is nice to pair alongside your other spells that do elemental damage. Now yes, it's going to be like a longer animation that does it while we having to stand still, so you can get staggered out of it, but if you do land the entire combo, it can be extremely deadly. Number 34, Explodes. Now this is a physical-based projectile spell that does actually absolutely decimate larger bosses. It hits them multiple times, phases through them, and just ends up doing a metric ton of damage. And when you combine this with the fact that it does only consume 11 fate, have a 19 FP cost, and have a relatively faster animation, it makes it incredibly easy to use. Now, another good thing that this spell actually does have is a very good tracking, so it makes it good against more smaller enemies or enemies that do like to move around a whole bunch. Especially on fourth back, it makes it really good there as well. Now, despite it having all these good things, I still feel like it's outclassed in a bunch of areas. If you're using Ancient Dragon's Lightning Strike, it's just going to be way better against larger bosses. It just does more damage. Now, yes, Esther is easier to use and have a lower requirements, but if you end up getting your hands on Ancient Dragon's Lightning Strike, getting a fully charged attack off just works way better. And against smaller enemies, it just doesn't do the damage at all. Like, the damage is just really bad. And it's to the point that I'd just rather have any other projectile attack, like a Lightning Spear or Flame Pull upon them. Those things to do more damage, even without the fully charged version. And if we're end up having like a faster animation, they consume less FP, and actually do stagger enemies as well. Hester's staggered like nothing. Nor does it do like any stance damage. But then other spells, I at least stagger them and actually do some type of stance damage. So yes, this spell does do plenty of things well, but I don't think it actually does anything the best. Number 33, we have Scarlet Aeonia. Now, this is one of the coolest looking spells in the entire game, but it also is actually pretty decent as well. It procs Scarlet Rot extremely quickly, and the purpose of it is to use it right at the beginning of the fight. You proc Scarlet Rot, then switch back to your main things. But yeah, this thing can be like over 600 Scarlet Rots with them, which is like more than enough for almost every single boss in the entire game. And it actually does do like a beefed up version of Scarlet Rot. It can end up doing like 30% of an entire enemy's or boss's health bar, so it's just doing that in one attack, which is always going to be really good. And the fact that you're doing it at point blank range means that you use things like the Kindred of Rock Exaltation and the Mushroom Crown, and you end up getting like 30% more damage for the next 20 seconds. But honestly, that entire punch of the month could actually help propel it into the S tier, but unfortunately, there's like a bunch of downsides. One, it takes up 3 full spell slots, it consumes 48 FP, and actually does have like a longer animation, especially when there's like recovery frames. You're like almost going to get hit every single time when you do use this spell, so it can be very risky as well. But going to New Game Cup with this spell is going to be really nice to have, because just using it right at the beginning of the fight is going to be very beneficial. Download 32, we have the Unendurable Frenzy spell. Now this is mainly going to be a PvP based spell, because bad spells typically are, but this one still performs amazingly because it does so much damage. It spreads enemies' health bars that quickly. Now there are going to be a few downsides. One, it does consume a lot of FP when you have it fully charged, which is definitely the optimal way to use it. So a nice and popular pairing alongside with this build is going to be the Severely Hidden to just like negate all types of MP costs. Another downside that it does have is that at the end of the animation you're always like guaranteed to do this like follow-up attack that has like a very long animation. It does do some nice damage, but the fact that it's always gonna happen and you can't really cancel it means you gotta get hit close every single time that you use your spell. And for the last downside is the fact that it does like a bunch of madness build up to yourself, which typically you could pair this alongside some madness with this types of talismans, or you could just like leave your madness with this very small and pair it alongside the black dumpling helmet, so every single time you put madness upon yourself, you end up just getting more damage anyway. Now, unfortunately, this means you do take some more.
Guys, start winning, please.
But with how much damage this spell ends up outputting, and with how actually like sunlock smaller enemies, it can perform extremely well. 31 aspect of the Crucible of Thorns. Now, this bad boy spell is incredibly fun to use. Now, when it's not fully charged, it doesn't really perform that well. Has pretty poor range, doesn't really do good damage. But when you have it fully charged, you cover so much distance incredibly quickly, and upon impact, smaller types of enemies can get like heated up into the air. You do like 30